I was saying earlier that my presentation is about the Principalia and the creation of parishes in the Diocese of Caceres. This is actually part of a bigger project that I started working on in 2023 as a PhD student in UP. And I wrote this initially for a class, but I haven't really finished the paper. But I have started gathering the sources I need. And it's actually a case study of nearby towns, Bombon, Magarao, and also Calabanga, which separated from Quipayo. Ironically, Quipayo is now subsumed under Calabanga. So that's one interesting story there. But in the case of my presentation, I'd like to talk about Bombon and then Visita Pagatpat, which used to be part of Quipayo, but then was transferred to Calabanga rather informally. And then Quipayo was trying to make a claim eventually. And then Calabanga refused to return it to Quipayo. And then, of course, Quipayo wouldn't agree to that. So we're going to take a look at how the dynamics of conflict and negotiation were in play in the case of these two localities. So I'd like to begin my presentation with William Henry Scott's notion of cracks in the parchment curtain. He proposed that it is possible to find the native voice in Spanish archival documents. Pwede tang mahiling or madamog ang boses kang mga natives, ano? And he was actually replying to Teodoro Agoncillo's famous, or should I say infamous claim that there's no Philippine history before 1872. So Scotty proposed his notion of cracks in the parchment curtain, that it is possible to discern the native voice in Spanish archival documents. So we can see this in letters, reports, complaints, appeals for support, and petitions, which contain direct or implied references to Filipino or native behavior and conditions. Yun yung sinabi ni Scotty in a 1978 essay in Philippine Studies. So these cracks, they figure very prominently actually in the National Archives of the Philippines Ereccion de Pueblos record series. It's actually available online. You can access this from your devices. And the ones I'm most interested in would be the Principalia petitions and then the letters written in the vernacular. Itong mga nakasurat sa Bicol, lalong-lalo na nakakakilig pag nakakahiling ng arog kaya ng mga dokumento sa archives. So I'm building on the work of historians who have already shown us that the Principalia exercise their agency. Igwasindang capacity for decision making. Dailang sa inda tig-impose ang colonialism, dailang sa inda pinirit kang mga Espanyol na gibuhon ang mga gusto nindang ipagibo sa inda, no? So pinahiling ni Norman Owen in his 1974 essay that the Principalia in fact descended from what was the Maginoo class during the pre-colonial period, and they became an influential local elite who exercised political, economic, and social power in municipal affairs. In 1992, Greg Bancroft also argued that municipal power did not just rest on the curate, on the friar, not just on the alcalde mayor who was a Spaniard, but also rested on the natives like the gobernadorcillo, the cabezas de barangay, even the notaries and clerks, the escribanos. They were necessarily natives and they controlled many affairs in municipalities. Damon Woods, likewise, in 2015, showed us that the men of Nauhan in Mindoro petitioned that the Jesuits remain in their community. Abo ninda na recollect sang magribay sa mga Jesuita, gusto ninda mga Jesuits manggiraray ang mag-administer kan sa indang parokya. So we see that it was their initiative for the Jesuits to remain in their community. In the same way, Grace Concepcion in 2019, she shows that the Principalia were very much engaged and they actively participated in land negotiation cases in several towns, especially in Mahayhay and Cavinti. I think in another article she shows there was also a similar case in Longos and Paete, yung mga border disputes. So naipakita ito ni Grace not just in this article but also in her dissertation which she presented at UP Diliman. So for this morning, I examined three Principalia petitions from Camarines, particularly from Bombon, Calabanga, and Quipayo. I explained the reasons why Bombon petitioned to have their own parish, as well as the resulting competing interests between Calabanga and Quipayo. Actually, hindi siya resulting talaga kasi matagal na yung conflict between the two. But in any case, I argue that the Principalia exercised their agency by actively negotiating with the colonial authorities, A, the creation of an independent parish in Bombon, and B, the rightful ownership of Pagatpat, and C, where Pagatpat ought to be subsumed. So ini itong mga tigne-negotiate nila during those times. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the geography of the places mentioned, you will find them here. These are riverine towns, inaagihan kan Salog, hali sa San Miguel Bay. No? Haranihon lang sa Naga, na kaidto Nueva Caceres and Apod. And it's also by Mount Isarog. You also see Mount Isarog in the map. So let's begin with Bombon, since I don't have much time. Um, the petition came from Don Santiago Raimundo, the gobernadorcillo of Bombon. And along with the Principalia and residents, they petitioned to the bishop the creation of their own parish. Sabi ninda, it lacks a church of its own, for we already have, by the grace of God, as of the year 1793, 503 whole tributes. I think it was Rolly Borinaga who argued that when a visita or a settlement reaches 500 tributes, they usually apply or petition to be elevated into an independent pueblo or an independent parish or both. No? Usually they go hand in hand, but there are cases when they are temporally separated from the mother town but spiritually dependent. May mga arog kaya na gray areas. But in the case of Bombon, they're petitioning to be spiritually independent from Quipayo. They were part of Quipayo. Kaya pagharanihon sila sa Quipayo ngunyan, ano, it's a few kilometers away. I think 2 kilometers away from Bombon. So, I think this is from the letter by Raimundo. Sabi ninda, many of us fail to fulfill the precept of hearing Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation on account of bad weather or rain, given the distance between our town and that of Kipayo. If it feels near right now, it's because you have modes of transportation. Kadto syempre nagraralakaw, baka damulagsan ang sakayan, so masakit magpasiring sa Kipayo para magsimba. And the following pages of the petition, you would see the different signatories of the Principalia petition. These are the members of the Principalia. It's not just the current officials, but also the previous officials, yung mga kapitan pasado, kabesas pasado, no? Nagpirerma man sinda, not to mention even the residents, the free men, no? Ang apod kayan sa Bicol, mga aratagon, mga laborers or farmers, workers, no? Nagpetition din sinda kaibanan su Principalia. So it's not just the Principalia. So I think this letter is to the Alcalde Mayor this time. They also wrote to the Alcalde Mayor in 1803. The previous letter, I think, was from 1800, if I'm not mistaken, to Bishop Colliantes. This one was addressed to the Alcalde Mayor Jose Eguia. So sabi ninda, no one knows and can attest better than your grace that our town, having 533 and a half, tumaas na, yung tributes nila, and growing daily thanks to good land, it finds itself subject to the spiritual administration of the town of Kipayo, which has no more than 240 tributes and lies almost half an hour's distance from our town. The worst part being that when there are floods, the road becomes covered with water and no one is able to go to mass, as happened 4 times this past year, malamang habagat season, as or bagyo season, as your grace and the most illustrious Lord Bishop, who was then in Kipayo, both witnessed. So iyo ini ang sa indang nirereklamo, masakiton magduman sa Kipayo, ano daw kung magtugdas na lang kita ning sa diritang parokya. Anyway, kaya naman suportahan kang taxpayers, kang mga natives, itong sa indang magiging kura. Furthermore, The grief and distress that afflicts us, a town this large, one that needs no other to support its own parish priest, sometimes going without mass, and its elders and women constantly inconvenienced in walking all the way to Quipayo through downpours, to which is added the parish priest's inability to come and bring the holy sacraments to the sick during other floods, has obliged us to seek and request the building of a church and parish house where our priest may reside, so as to secure the administration of the holy sacraments and the spiritual aid that the sick require at the hour of their death. The priest is unable to go to administer sacraments. On the other hand, the natives are unable to go to Kipayo to also receive the sacraments, to hear Mass most especially. So, in this letter, they actually attached a plan. Ano itong itsura kang bombon sa ininda itutugdas itong simbahan? And it actually looked like this. Itong tig-present ko sa bago na nasa cover slide, iyon na iyan si mapa, si plan na tig-submit ninda kay Alcalde Mayor Jose de Eguia. No? So, nahihiling nindo dyan itong simbahan to your left, and then of course some structures to your right like the Casa Real, and then they're surrounded by fields, and you see a river as well passing through the heart of the town. So talagang barahao ng Bombon. I'm sure ngunyan may experiences pa ng ganding baha sa Bombon, especially during Christine a couple of years ago. So, iyon na ini ang itsura kang Bombon ngunyan. And it's actually famous for its leaning tower, leaning bell tower. I'm not sure if it's designed that way, but even the earlier accounts of, I think, Huerta, even Puya, and the others, they describe the church as the one with the leaning tower. So, haloy na talagang arog kaiyan ang belfry kang Bombon. Okay, so let's proceed to Kipayo versus Calabanga. So si mga dai pa nakaduman sa Kipayo, aron kay ini ang itsura kang simbahan. I think this was taken in 2021 when Father Francis, Father Philip and I did an episode of Rakdag in front of the church. Itong sa Indang show kay itong pandemic, you know. So, in terms of Kipayo and Calabanga, we find here a conflict. So in 1728, mas amay pa, the bishop adjoined Visita Pagatpat to Calabanga to help the latter build their church and convent. So ginawa ito ng walang formality, walang document, walang order. It was done verbally by the bishop. And by 1772, the Principalia of Calabanga, having established their own parish, attempted to formally claim the Visita and permanently transferred it to their town by securing an order from an alcalde mayor. Daig pangaranan kun Saysay, pero itong alcalde mayor during that time, itong nag-sponsor na maging part na ang pagatpat kan sa Indang Bayan. Now, this is not about the creation of a parish in Pagatpat, but I think this is related because the order that created the parish in Bombon is the same order that ruled where Pagatpat should belong. So at saan may hiling ta kung anong naging resulta kan conflict na ini. But in 1795, Kipayo petitioned to the alcalde mayor that the visita be returned to them because it was rightfully theirs, it belonged to them, pinasubli lang yan sa Calabanga. But Calabanga responded in the same year by invoking what they called a prescripción del derecho. Gusto nilang sabihin, sa haloy ng panahon na yaon sa si Pagatpat, dapat samuya na. Okay? That entitled Calabanga to keep the visita. The gobernadorcillos of Calabanga and Quipayo tried to resolve the matter amongst themselves, even the Principalia, not just the gobernadorcillos, but also the Principalia. As a matter of fact, I found this letter, 1795 letter, January 31, written from Calabanga by Gobernadorcillo. I think this is Lazarto or Nazarto de la Cruz, the Gobernadorcillo, addressed to Mariano Diego Espiritu of Kipayo. So pinag-uulayan ninda pero dahil da ina-resolve si concern, da ina-resolve si dispute, land dispute, sinakat ninda si kaso kay Eguia, no, sa alcalde mayor. So that in 1803, Eguia ruled that Pagatpat belonged to Kipayo and that Evangelista during that year as well, they lodged a complaint against Calabanga that Visita Pagatpat has yet to present themselves to them and heard Mass in Quipayo despite the order released by Eguia in December 1803. The Principales of Pagatpat dismantled their house and rebuilt them near Calabanga. Ano tahabo ning Pagatpat na mapasairarom kang Kipayo? That's the question. The Teniente of Pagatpat was unable to gather the native residents to present themselves to Kipayo. In other words, they wanted to be part of Calabanga. A letter a year later would reveal the reason why the residents of Pagatpat would rather remain in Calabanga rather than in Kipayo. So in January 1804, Domingo Fernandez and the Principally of Pagatpat this time objected to the Alcalde Mayor's ruling that they be placed under Kipayo's jurisdiction. Their primary grievance was agricultural in nature. Daidasin da tinataawaning access sa irrigation water. No? So, during planting seasoning palay, binubuaya da kang kipayo itong irrigation. So, syempre, dahil sinda nakakatanom nin tultul, dahil ano ang tinanom ninda, no? Dahil sinda nakakaani because of that. And of course, it was to their detriment. Um, in other words, they asked to remain in Calabanga because of this reason. Ano, habo sindang tawan ng access, the same access to irrigation. So, mahihiling tadigdi ano si interplay kang mga prinsipales kang Kipayo, kang Calabanga, pati na din kan Pagatpat. May boses inda, no? Dahil lang inimpose sa inda si colonialism. As a matter of fact, because of this reframing, we see nagkaroon itong alkalde, itong bishop, itong governor general, they were simply acting based on these petitions, no? Daininda inaandaman ining mga arog kaining kaso, rather nagre-respond na lang sinda kung ano itong mga ipetisyon sa inda. Of course, may mga officers yan na ma-assess kang mga petitions. But we see that at the end of the story, it's Aguilar who will issue the ruling. And what was the ruling? In a 23 June 1804 letter to Jose de Eguia, Rafael Maria de Aguilar, who was at that time the Governor General, issued a decree resolving the petition to create an independent parish in Bombon and the dispute between Kipayo and Calabanga over Pagatpat. One, Aguilar grants the petition of the town of Bombon regarding the erection into a parish independent of Kipayo. And necessarily, they also became a town, although they already were a town in the 1700s, but mas naging full-fledged ng town yung Bombon when their parish became independent of Kipayo. And then Aguilar ruled that Visita Pagatpat be attached to the town of Quipayo, being separated from that of Calabanga, to which it had been joined for reasons that no longer apply today. Ang suspetsa ko digdiyo, nawara kaya si Bombon sa Quipayo? So kung 533 and a half tributes, dakulaon itong nawara sa Kipayo, and for Kipayo to sustain itself and remain a pueblo in the 19th century, they needed another visita. And that visita was Pagatpat. I think it's now Barangay San Jose, if I'm not mistaken. Sa atubangan kang simbahan kang Kipayo, may tinampo dyan, ano, pasiring duman sa palaog-laog pa. Yaon dyan ang Pagatpat Road, Barangay Pagatpat. I think it's called San Jose now or by a different name. But it's no longer Pagatpat. Pero iyan ang Pagatpat kaito, no? So, I think may kinaaraman ining pag-attach sa Kipayo duman sa pagkawara kang Bombon. Okay? So, it's very, very important. And I think that's the reason why they were part of the same ruling, even though the conflict had been brewing for decades already. So, in response, ano naman yung naging recommendation ni Bishop Colliantes? In an October 20, 1804 letter from Calabanga, Colliantes recommended that Fray Juan de la Torre, OFM, be appointed as the first ever curate of Bombon. Although the diocese was highly secularized in the 19th century, we notice that Bombon remained in the hands of the Franciscans. Yan si Fray Bien sa satuyang meeting. I'm so happy. We have a Franciscan representative this morning. So during the Spanish period, we find the Franciscans administering Bombon. For instance, in 1864-65, Fray Tomas de Guadalajara, according to Huerta, and according to Moreno in 1876, Fray Jose Serrano was the curate of Bombon. I think na secularized lang siya in the 20th century na. No, I don't think it was ever secularized in the 19th century. So to conclude, the Principalia of Bombon played an active role in petitioning the creation of their parish in 1804. The Principalia of Quipayo and Calabanga exercised their agency in their respective claims of Visita Pagatpat. And also, let's not forget about the Principally of Visita Pagatpat. They expressed their opinion on the matter, although it was undermined by the decision of Aguilar in 1804. But we cannot deny that they also had their desires, their interests at play, their opinion on the matter. So we cannot deny that they were also exercising their agency, only to be undermined by the 1804 ruling by Rafael Maria de Aguilar. So I think the most important takeaway that I'd like us to have at the end of my presentation is that notions of colonial imposition or the accommodation of native elites are now put in question. Because that's always been what was taught to us, na ang nag-shape kang colonial landscapes, yung mga Espanyol, si Fraile, si civil official, not to mention si mga religious orders na nag-disperse sa iba-ibang parts ng Pilipinas. But in this case, as in the many cases in other towns in the Philippines, we see that they were not simply accommodated to the colonial bureaucracy, rather they were a huge part of it, right? They were a huge part of it, and they were also co-shapers of the colonial landscape. That would be all for my presentation. Diyos mabalos po sa inyong pagdangog. And as we say in Saysay, para sa danay pang pagsaysay.